My presentation this morning will be conceptual. The topic of the presentation is a systemic approach to intangibility. It takes a lot from Niklas Luhmann, who I'll be introducing, and it brings together his thoughts with those of Richard Matysich, who was an accounting researcher, who I'll be introducing as well. To begin, we'll be talking about Luhmann, and I'll be talking about his vision of social systems. He was a great student of social systems. He didn't talk much about accounting. He had only one article on accounting, despite an enormous number of writings throughout his career. And so we're going to compare him with another thinker who's a specialist in accounting, Richard Matysich. And we'll see what lessons we can take from this interaction between two thinkers with regards to the definition of intangibility and also the definition of the social cycle of intangibility. Since this presentation is very conceptual, I try to get my feet back on the ground from time to time, and we'll talk a little bit about brands, patents, and we'll look at concrete examples from Matysich. I did not find any direct lessons for care, although there are implicit connections. Altogether, in the conversation that will follow the presentation, we'll be able to discuss these potential effects for care. So first, I'd like to present our two authors. First of all, Niklas Luhmann was a German sociologist. When he was recruited to the University of Bielefeld, they asked what his research program was, and he responded, describe social systems. And they asked him how long this program would take, and he said, my entire career. And that is exactly what he did. He devoted his life and his entire career to one piece of work, a description that's a ever more detailed phenomenology of social systems. He was born in 1927 in Germany. His French Wikipedia site describes him as a Nazi soldier, which is not the case. He was part of the Hitler Youth at the time, but that was a necessity, an unfortunate necessity. So throughout his life, he tried to understand and to describe, which is at the basis of this focus on phenomenology, which is a passion for social systems and concepts. Some works that I'd like to suggest is, first of all, Vertrauen from 1968. That was only translated in 2006, translated into French. This was at the beginning of his project. And his work is very chronological. So it's important when reading his work to situate each work within his career as a whole, because his work became more and more detailed over time. This work, Vertrauen, is the only one where he really tried to understand human beings. Subsequently, he focused more on social mechanisms and less on humans. Personally, I think that he simply didn't have necessarily the tools to do so. He used a number of tools to try to build his vision, but it feels like neuropsychology didn't exist at the time or was not sufficiently developed. So he was unable to advance in his study of humans as he did in society. A little problem with these slides, I think. Here we are. Another work that could be interesting to supplement this presentation is Ecological Communication in 1986. As an observer of the development of the Green movement, he wanted to see how these movements, which were protest movements, were developing. And he found that a protest movement alone serves as an observer of social systems and has difficulty modifying and changing its actions. His followers advocated a political program, a political agenda based on ecology for the political system in general. In Die Gesellschaft, der Gesellschaft, the Wheels of Society in English, this work is currently being translated into French. It's a 2-volume work that really condenses all of Luhmann's thoughts over a 3-decade period, all of his thoughts on phenomenology. We'll continue with Richard Matysich, another German-speaking author. He was originally Austrian. I forgot to mention that Luhmann lived in the United States for a while, studying sociology at Harvard. That's where he met Parsons, who was an inspiration for some of his work. But then Luhmann and Parsons took different paths regarding human nature. Richard Matysich left Austria and moved to the United States, or to North America, and spent the rest of his career in Canada. He had a bit of a dual career, and we'll understand why later on. He's really in the middle of the ideas of the main ideas, main schools of accounting. He was into assimilation methods. He imported the electronic spreadsheet into accounting. And he also contributed to the popularity of simulation models. In the 2000s, he concentrated on taking stock of current accounting practices on the international stage. So he really had a worldwide view of accounting practices. He passed away 2 years ago. And he also worked on epistemological explorations of accounting, especially through his last work, where we see the ideas that we'll be connecting with Luhmann this morning. Now, to focus on Luhmann, he's usually described as a functionalist sociologist. He describes a society of the 1980s, 1990s. That's when his popularity was at its zenith. So a society that was growing more and more liberal. But his approach is a qualitative, constructivist approach based on phenomenology to to describe what a person sees. Now, just to look back at the phenomenology, to describe this school of thought, I'm going to go look back at Merleau-Ponty. So it's the study of phenomena as we observe them. Now, once again, a little problem with the slides. The method of phenomenology is immersion in the milieu that's being observed. A researcher is supposed to free himself from any pre-existing ideas, so to remain as close as possible to the object being studied. A phenomenologist is looking to describe the smallest irreducible entity, while resituating this entity in its context. It cannot be an event in isolation, but it has to be situated in a politico-historical, sociocultural context. This science is based on the fact that the description that comes out of this study cannot be dissociated from the beholder. Just like any qualitative research, it's hard to generalize it, it's hard to extend it to other fields. There's no real universalism in this field. We can find other prerequisites for intangibility. We can look back at Merleau-Ponty once again on invisibility or invisibles, who says when we want to describe the intangible or invisibles or intangibles, you cannot use the same vocabulary, the same analytical specters as you would for visibles or for tangibles. So, for example, we could use an example of goodwill as a visible. Now, the path for Merleau-Ponty or Luhmann is to go back to things themselves. The interpreters cannot hear. The path put forth by Merleau-Ponty or Luhmann goes back to Husserl, that you have to look at things themselves. Now, I'd like to go on a journey with Luhmann to understand his thinking. Now, keep in mind that despite the thousands of pages he wrote, it's hard really to quantify his work, and he also refused any visual depiction of his thoughts. Now, I will be using visuals with apologies to Nicholas Luhmann to try to explain this in greater detail with greater clarity. I'm having trouble moving on to the next slide. Here we are. Luhmann describes first and foremost a general environment. Not at the very beginning of his career, but a little bit later, he describes a dual environment made up of a human environment on one side, and the other side a natural environment. In this dual environment, you can see three systems. The first is the living system. The second is the psychic system. And the third is the social system. As Wiener, one of the fathers of cybernetics, said, the social system exists only because human beings need to communication. So communication is the basis for the existence of the social system. This system, these systems are reproduced by remaining isolated in themselves. The interpreters cannot hear very well. They're reproduced through events which are, for example, suspension of death, life being suspension of death, a temporary suspension of death. Whereas the social system would be reproduced by a system of thought. And I'm sorry, that was the psychic system, and then the social system is reproduced through communication. Here, those are Luhmann's three main systems. Luhmann used the term of fatherly differentiation, which I'll explain later. Luhmann was had a hard time capturing the essence of humanity. And his work was limited to describing the social system, which he said reproduces the pattern of these three main systems. Every time a new function is necessary to social life, it's developed as a subsystem within this social system, the political system, the legal system, the economic system, academic, etc. And the list goes on. There are many other systems we could mention: religious system, artistic system. These systems are also closed within themselves. They do not, they're isolated, they do not communicate among each other, because each one has its own mode of communication. And the mode of communication depends on a topic or a problem that is unique to this subsystem. Every communication, every mode of communication is based on codes. For the scientific system, this code would be true or false. In the economic system, the program would be defining prices. The code would be carrying out a transaction or not. These systems only appear when they have a medium. A program is not enough for them to exist. They need a medium as well, and that medium has to be sufficiently present in society to set this subsystem apart from others. This makes sense when we look at the economic system. If we look at the emergence of money, that's when with the emergence of money, the economic system was able to take play its full role. So in this case, communication around value, around money, would define the economic system. And the economic system, Luhmann saw as hegemonic within this social system because it concentrates an enormous amount of communication and attention. These systems, as I said, cannot communicate among each other, but there are echoes between them. For example, learning would be at the crossroads of the economic system, the academic system, and the political system. There's another sub-system of organization. This organization within the social system works like a subsystem, but in fact, it's not a subsystem because it does not have its own mode of communication. Organization makes it possible to circulate information through different systems. It's the only link between, the only simultaneous link between different systems. And we'll see later how this will contribute to our understanding of intangibles. Luhmann also devoted one of his works to sociology of risk, which is a fascinating work, but probably the most difficult to read. Perhaps the translation into English is not very good either. And what stands out there is his approach to uncertainty. Unlike Knight, whose codes are predominant, Luhmann focuses on uncertainties. The first uncertainty being danger. For example, the political system is part of the environment of the economic system. The systems and subsystems are all dissociated. So the danger is anything that comes from the outside, but risk, unlike danger, emerges from decisions made within the systems or subsystems. One example that we're living now, the danger of the coronavirus. The danger is the virus that comes from from outside, but the risk comes from the policies that are implemented or not to deal with this virus. The whole raison d'etre of this social system is to reduce uncertainty. The only purpose of society is reducing these uncertainties. A few lessons to try to build bridges this morning. Luhmann, who was Luhmann considered himself outside of social systems, but would project himself within social systems for decision-making. Decisions that lead to actions, which will in turn lead to a new trajectory for the social system. The social system is the result of all of the unconcerted decisions made within this context. Now, trying to move forward, look, you can move up or move down. Now, what Luhmann recognizes is that there are a multitude of potential and possible systems, and that is what places him outside of the social system, because you can imagine any number of different social systems. So a decision can can move from one state of a social system to a new state. And the progression along this time scale leads to a sort of irreversibility, an entropy. It means that the conditions that we abandon with each decision will never come to pass again. So it's a one-way street, if you will. These decisions are made on the basis of codes that are unique to each of the systems. And so when human beings project themselves into these systems, they use different criteria. Luhmann's vision of decision making is very interesting because it's quite different from rationalism. It really focuses on the irrationality of decisions. So, for example, when a consumer makes a decision in the economic system, those decisions are not necessarily consistent or coherent. The same thing for a politician within the political system. His or her decisions will not necessarily be consistent from one to the next. Luhmann also has a dual idea of confidence or trust. For Luhmann, a functionalist society is the third state of society. The first state is tribal, then hierarchical. And when the members of society are equal, then this hierarchical society is no longer conceivable, and we come to a system of, or a society of trust. The relationships of trust can be seen in some social systems, and it is necessary for the stability of these systems because trust serves to reduce uncertainties. So at the same time, there's a duality between trust and, I guess we could say, assurance or guarantee, which balance each other out to some extent. Now, as I mentioned before, Luhmann's phenomenology serves simply to describe, and not to forecast, not to predict, not to come up with any solutions. Mateschitz, on the other hand, for those in the audience who are not necessarily accountants, generally in accounting, we divide into two main schools, positivism and constructivism or interpretivism. And then there's a pragmatism also that is perhaps between these two schools. Other authors have identified three fields of accounting research: fundamental, applied, and normative. And there's no real consensus on how to describe different schools of accounting research. And Mateschitz identified on one side positive accounting theory, on the other hand a more critical interpretive approach, and the middle ground that he proposes what a normative conditional accounting methodology, which is not between the two, but really at the crossroads of the two extremes, the positive and critical interpretive approaches. In Matisich's thinking, we see very analytical contributions that could be connected to the positive theory, and then on the other side, there's also a much more philosophical approach. I prepared some somewhat more detailed definitions of these different theories that unfortunately we don't have time to read in their entirety. To come back to Luhmann's system, we talked about the living system, the psychic system, and the social system, and then the environment. When we look to identify an ontology, we could hypothesize that each of these systems and the environment in general produces their own realities. So a material reality from the environment, a biological reality from the living system, a psychic reality from the psychic system, which we also call sometimes a system of consciousness, and a social reality from the social system. These four realities Matisich identified them as four different forms of reality that could be grounds for different analyses. In this onion model, because there are four layers of reality, Matisich considers the reality of an object according to these four different approaches, and also prioritizing them.
So what we can offer here is a further analysis. As we could see, within the social system, there are subsystems. And what we could say that those subsystems can project their own reality. So there would be an economic reality, which comes from the political reality, a legal reality from the political reality, and a scientific reality, as well as religious reality, artistic reality. So this analysis meets a few facts that are going to be verified, because if you look what happens for international standards, there is a rule which comes out of the IFRS, which is it's called substance over form. That means that the economic substance prevails over. So we have two realities, so the economic reality and the legal reality. And in this choice made by international standard, we have a hierarchy, which means that the economic reality comes before legal reality. Another suggestion from Matisich, which could be directly applicable to intangibility, is the social cycle. According to Matisich, is something tangible, so intangibles that are observed by Matisich have in common a form of social cycle. So they all go through a triptych which would be common to them all, which would be issue come from the materials, so the natural world, before being projected as ideas. That's where they become intangible within the social system. And this social system, in one way or another, would turn them into tangible or make them, or to actualize them. So there would be the turn into tangibles. So I'll give you two examples from Matisich to illustrate the social cycle. For example, institutions, originally they are based on inter-individual relationships, which are going to be projected as institutions within the social system, where they're going to acquire the social reality or political reality as well as the legal reality, so that they are able to buy premises. And then that's when they become tangible, because within this building there will be people, live people. And to complete the social cycle, there will be a contribution from tangible reality. So another example from the accounting world, that would be the accounting profit. This accounting profit comes within the operating cycle. Then it is projected as a material reality, and then it is projected into the social cycle as an intangible or abstract, because it's not observable. But then it acquires other realities, so social and organizational reality or legal, because it can be audited and agreed and confirmed, and then they might be distributed as dividends. This distribution of dividends is tangible. So it arises from the accounting profit that gives it back its tangibility, material tangibility. So this can be verified on many other intangibles. So this is something I can suggest. For example, patents. It comes out of research work. So from a reality, material reality and psychic reality, it becomes an invention within the social cycle that can contribute to the social system. But when it's protected, when one acquires the rights, it will take a much more tangible shape. In the books, the patents, so if it's generated internally, so if it has a social reality, a reality in the organization, and a legal reality, that's not enough. Even though it's got a material reality, that doesn't give it a status, an accounting status. However, even if there are future flows, it doesn't have an accounting reality. But if it is being exchanged on a market, if it's transacted, then there is an alignment between the material reality and the accounting reality. So the social cycle from Matisich highlights the paradox of for the accounting of some of the intangibles. So to illustrate the differences that could be acquired within the social cycle, we can look at reputation, the reputation of the organization, which could be issued from the quality of the goods offered or the work environment, which can be important for a business and for its image. This reality is visible in the social cycle through customer satisfaction or employee satisfaction. And you can see there is no real tangibility within the social system of this type of reality. The reputational reality is within the social cycle, but it doesn't have anything to do with the other subsystems. So this gives us a difference between the origin of transfer towards the social system, so this intangible translation, as well as this actualization of the system or not. So we could also mention here the goodwill, as we just analyzed reputation. So here I just looked at acquired goodwill, and we will have the same principles when acquired goodwill is recognized in the accounts. So there is a convergence between a recognition of the material reality and the accounting reality. To go further now, how can we use, so we have just meshed the two theories and the concepts. How can we put that into on an operational level so that we can understand intangibility or not? So some suggestions here that I want to put forward. They are not fully formed and are open to discussion, and which I suggest that you could do today. So we might not look just at the functionality of the systems, of the social systems, as well as the relationships between the social systems. Some intangibles, such as reputation, find their origin or their update or actualization elsewhere. And then we could be looking at obligations, which are linked to intangibles. So money, compliance with rights, the responsibilities, the risk that have to be borne, all the advantages, profitability, return on investment, to remain within this accounting and financial reality. However, it could be completely consistent with the suggestions of other researchers such as Merleau-Ponty and Husserl. So how should we go about it? So we identified several types of realities coming from systems and subsystems. Each type of reality could be associated to rights that have to be complied with or responsibilities. For example, biological reality that requires compliance with human rights. And that's where we put a form on responsibilities, for example, IP. This is associated to the various level of realities. We don't have a priority list, but we are going a little bit further as to what they mean, those realities, that they have their own requirements, responsibilities, and so on. Furthermore, we could analyze those levels of realities through the risks, the prism of risks. What are the risks associated to each reality? So social risk, mental risk, human risk, environmental risk are linked to material reality. We can find legal risk, for example, fraud. I talked about IP earlier on. So we can break down those realities further, and we could get to inject specific risks which associate the risks and responsibilities to the intangibles that we are looking at. And for each reality, we could associate a type of profitability or positive outputs. So welfare, mental welfare, social welfare, healthy life. So those are the positive outputs of these forms of realities. So Matisich invites us to priorities, but I haven't done that. So through this breakdown, here we have 5 points for analysis. So risk, profitability, responsibility, relationship, compliance with relationships. That's important for Luhmann in the theory of systems, especially for the ecology, which is for him compliance and with relationships. And then there is the rights. And we can draw this polyhedron, which could be associated to a particular intangible, such as here, patents. Patents give rights and forces compliance with these rights, and the patent holder can also have the benefit of profitability. The patent needs to be maintained, and that's a responsibility to renew it every year. And then this patent forces a form of respect of relationships, which can be also excluding people from using the patent or including someone through the license system. So brand names, that's the same, and with profitability attached. If I look at another intangible, which is research and development, I will find a similar profile. But if research and development is not materialized as a patent, does not give me rights directly, and that can be defended. If I look at client list, it's another profile again, because I don't have a risk as such arising from the list, but I have an obligation to comply. I have profits that can be drawn from reviewing consumer behavior, for example. And finally, there is reputation that we mentioned earlier on, which gives a profile which is similar to research and development. So we have various intangible profiles that can be separated according to those 5 functions outside, coming from realities. And I haven't mentioned the realities that bring them about or actualize them. So beyond those suggestions of mine, by working on intangibles, we come to notice the relationship on an ecological level. So these relationships are very dependent on each other, yet there might be research to be done regarding their chronological dependencies. For example, reputations could be, for example, linked to innovation, to research and development, to the number of patents issued by a business, but there is a chronology to it which has not been reviewed, and this chronology comes out of the social cycle, because we have a repetition of social cycles to get to various categories of intangibles. So these are the suggestions I wanted to bring forward this morning. And in my conclusions, what we saw today was we looked at 2 different theories that we meshed. One is Luhmann's theory, the systems, and the onion theory, which is Matisich. And they've been combined, and they offer perspectives based on different forms of realities, and those different forms of reality can help us qualify intangibles. Another contribution by Matisich, which is the social cycle for intangibles, helps us break down even further and to review those realities and identify the process that will be involved in the social cycle, or the mechanisms that could be involved in the social cycle to turn an intangible object into a tangible object. So those different forms of reality that we saw at the end, they are sources of profitability, as we knew from the accounting. They also give rights. They also give an exposure to risk. They force a form of liability, accountability, and requires compliance with ecological relationships. All of this can give us a framework to analyze intangibles. Why do we need such a framework? First of all, to qualify an intangible. What is it? What is a potential intangible objects, so that we can recognize the number of ontologies of intangibles. If you read through the accounting literature, there is a feeling that there is only one kind of intangibles. But I question this and look for tools to show the multiplicity of intangibles objects. So framework, why? To qualify the risk and obligation arising from these different realities associated with intangibles. Framework again to express the obligations in terms of social, environmental, political debts and mechanisms, which depends on the place where the object is actualized. And for an object to become intangible, we could also be looking at a targeted reporting and to suggest appropriate indicators for each reality and for the actualization of intangibles. And finally, so in terms of evaluation, so there's always the issue of measuring intangibles in the accounts, and to get around the constant issues that seem to set aside the issue of intangibility because the methods are not sufficient. So according to my position, those methods are no worse for intangibles than they are for tangibles. They have certain boundaries, but that's for all objects that are being evaluated. The issue is the representation and the perception that comes out, and that could be measured and evaluated. Thank you for your attention.